Welcome to Design is Marketing, a podcast for product teams and marketers who want to learn what works and what doesn't when it comes to engaging and converting users. This podcast is brought to you by Sparker, the design agency. If you want to know more about it, check sparker.co. Everybody to a new episode of Design is Marketing. I'm your host, Federico, and my guest today is Carly Shute. Carly is an experienced marketing manager and communication manager. She has covered this position for different non-profits, organizations, and NGOs. With her today, we're going to talk about the central role that marketing and communications have for non-profit organizations. Carly, I'm very happy to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure. Well, usually, right, when it comes to marketing and design, NGOs is not really the first kind of niche that you think about. But with you today, we're going to talk about the role that marketing and communications have also for nonprofit companies, right? Would you like to start by telling us more about your career and how you get to what you're doing today at FoodCycle?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start where I am now. I'm head of marketing at FoodCycle, and I've been here for 4 years. And what we do is we take surplus food and we turn it into three-course meals for the community. And kind of my journey here, I think it's about 15 years, but I kind of want to stop counting now because then you start to feel old. But it kind of it was a weird route to this role, I guess. I actually went to university dead set on that I was going to be a fashion stylist. Turned out when I went there just wasn't really my bag. And that's when I kind of really got my first taste of the love for marketing. My first kind of marketing role was actually at Legoland. I was a PR assistant, so really fun way to kind of get into marketing. And from there, I stayed in theme parks. I worked at Chessington World of Adventures. And then I kind of went back to my love of fashion, worked in retail we have kind of a boutique retailer called Oliver Bonus here in the UK, which has grown quite a lot actually recently. And then it was around that time that I just really felt that I wanted to do something within the charity sector. I'm very much a kind of a people person. I volunteered kind of throughout my life in various kind of things. I just love to help people. So I really wanted to take my skills and move into the charity sector. I worked for a cancer support charity, and then I worked for a gambling education charity. And then I came across FoodCycle, and I love food as much as I love people. So this for me was I just remember
Like the perfect combination.
and I just remember seeing the role, and an old colleague said to me, if there was ever a job made for you, this was the job.
That's it.
I just love that I get to talk about food all day. It's absolutely brilliant. And yeah, it's a bit chaotic sometimes in the office. We don't go in very often, but if a conversation starts about food, it's quite hard to get off that. So we're all very passionate about food, and I think that's kind of what I love about FoodCycle. Actually, everybody's really passionate, and we try and, even though we're tackling some serious issues, we always try and make it quite fun, because actually that helps everybody, the people that work there, the beneficiaries that we support, and our volunteers. So that's my background.
Nice, interesting. Well, one of the things that strikes me about this background is that you moved from a more commercial position to the role that you cover now. I think that's quite enriching now, right? Because when you talk about charities, NGOs, or nonprofits, often what you see is that there is a bit of a commercial perspective lacking, which is obviously normal to some extent. But the other thing is that you still need resources to make the whole machine running in a way, right? Which is your role. So how do you see that your previous experience actually complements or support what you're doing now?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the outside that is definitely the kind of perception, but actually I think working on the inside, I think more and more charities are operating as much as they can like a commercial business. And actually, I know there's a lot of people that do want to move into the charity sector, and it can be quite difficult because a lot of people want to work in the charity sector. But actually, I think the benefit of my first role, they specifically wanted somebody with a commercial mind and a commercial background, because they didn't want to do
Got it.
things as charities typically do. And I think, there's real value, and I think there's a lot of people that make the move from one sector to the other, which I think is why, so many charities now do operate in a really similar way to commercial charities. So, if anything, I think sometimes our regulations, we have to be extra careful, and sometimes we have to be very accountable for all of the work that we do. But yeah, I think you'd be surprised at how much we do operate like a commercial company, and I think there's value in having that mixture of experience as well. So people that have got commercial backgrounds, because they just bring different ideas and different perspectives. And I know for me, when I'm learning, love to constantly learn, I always look outside the charity sector as well, because there's so many things that can be moved across different industries and different sectors. And I think, I definitely learned that, having worked across travel and tourism, retail, that they all have their differences, but they also all really have their similarities. So, I think having a mixed background is actually always really, really beneficial.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. So, well, one of the things we're going to talk about today is right the central role of your website in actually making sure that you can attract the right kind of support for your cause. When it comes to the work that charities do, say websites really have a crucial role into informing and attracting actually very different audiences, right? Would you like to tell us more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for any business, a website is, I think so many people have called it's the shop window, isn't it? It's, especially nowadays where so many people are using the internet to do any sort of research. I think the website is, such an important role. But I think more so almost for charities, because they almost have to build that extra level of trust. So you really have to get across on that website, what it is, what are you trying to achieve? Because there's so many people and so many different audiences that are kind of research. You might have a big corporate that are, have a huge amount of money that they want to donate to a charity, and they'll start to do research, and that website could be the make or break to someone kind of making that donation. So
Yeah.
I think they almost play an even more important role sometimes. You really have to tell that story. And yeah, the audiences, I mean, if you think for FoodCycle specifically, obviously every charity is different. I always break our audiences down into three. So we have our guests, or our beneficiaries. So that will be people that are trying to find a meal. Where is it? They're there for information. And actually, when we're looking at our tracking at the moment, we're constantly changing it, because actually we want our guests to come on, find where the meal is. That's it. They don't need to stay on our website. We want them to be at the meal. And then we have our volunteers. So we want people to understand, how they can get involved, how they can support, make that sign up process really, really easy. And then we have our supporters, which I kind of touched on earlier. It can be the website can be the make or break to whether someone makes a donation. So we often hear, or we'll ask people, oh, how did you find out about us? And they'll say, oh, we went on a search engine, we put food charity, and you came up. And then that landing on that website, they're just like, oh, wow, it's amazing what you do. And they make a donation. And that's the goal, really. That's what we want everybody to do.
Yeah.
So that's kind of our three audiences on our site.
Yeah, that resonates a lot with what I've seen as well. And I believe that actually with charities, it's often even a bit more complicated because many businesses just have one or two, right? It's often one. Sometimes if you are a platform, for example, you have two sides. But for charities, you really have the beneficiaries, sometimes volunteers, and then obviously also donors or supporters, which sometimes are also two different categories, right? Because there could be, for example, what you said, like corporates that decide to make a specific investment into something. So I was wondering, yeah, how do you kind of solve this problem of having the right message for every audience?
It's very difficult. There's no
You
answer to
don't.
that. And I think I was only having a conversation with somebody else the other day, actually. I think what I love about FoodCycle is it's so many things to so many different people, but that makes our job really difficult sometimes. So,
Right.
I think the one thing that always runs through everything that we do is fun. I touched on it earlier. We always try and have quite uplifting kind of comms. We try and, even though we're telling some not very nice stories all the time, we always try and focus on that positive. So it's not always about why somebody came, it's about what they benefited from being there. And I think that works for all our audiences, that attracts the right kind of people. I think friendly, open people is the kind of volunteers that we want at our projects. And I guess that's the same for organizations. So I guess they're probably really grouped together. But yeah, it's an ongoing battle, I'll be honest, because the people that eat with us, they can be anybody. They could be homeless, a family, refugees, so many different people. And it's the same with our volunteers. They're all age ranges. They're all there for different reasons. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think I don't really know the answer. It's hard. I could be here all day breaking down our audiences into segments. So yeah, I think we're just about, our brand is about having fun, about feeding people, about food. So sticking to that normally attracts the right people.
Yeah, and that's really something that I got from coming on your website. I really like the way in which you communicate your brand. I think it comes across very nicely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I remember, for example, one project in which I've been involved, right, that really had this kind of problem because, like, the beneficiaries and the volunteers were from very different groups, especially very different age groups, plus very different language groups. So, for example, in that case, what we had is that, well, funny enough, the volunteers, which tended to be elderly people, liked more the previous version of the website, which looked way more clunky, way more old than the one that we redesigned. Whereas obviously, say the newer generation like more the newest version. But what we discovered with user interviews and like qualitative analysis is that the problem was not so much that they liked the older version more, but rather they found it easier to find. And that's because, once you're used to something, then you also have that switching cost. So I think that really shows the importance of also after you release something, interviewing users one more, try to understand what their experience with the new thing that you have released is. Because too often you assume that new is always better. Well, new is not always better. You also have to understand like how to communicate it. So sometimes, for example, in that case, it really helped to have some kind of guided rollout to the new website. Do you have any similar experience?
Yeah, I think anywhere I've worked, it's always the same. Whenever you change something, especially with volunteers, you always get. I mean, I don't want to talk down on some of our websites. So we kind of have two websites. So we have our we call it our customer facing website, which anybody can view, but then we also have like a volunteer portal. Now, I personally don't find it really easy to use. However, a lot of our volunteers think it's great. It's really, really easy. And I think that's kind of across the board, isn't it? As you said, you like what you're used to. And I think the other thing I kind of always, I'd say always forget about, I think can easily be forgotten, is that when we're updating things or websites or whatever, we're usually sat at our desktop doing it, when actually the majority of our users are on a mobile. And I think I've been at organisations before where we've kind of maybe missed that step. And I think that's one of the things, whenever we look at updating something now, it's actually always mobile first. So yes, we can be testing it, it looks great on a desktop, but actually if 60% of our users are on a mobile, actually how does it look on that? Because that needs to be designed quite differently. So I think that's a really key thing that is always in my mind now. I'm very, very mobile first, mobile first, mobile first.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. And I think probably to add to this, there is also the fact to consider that, say, the user journey is not always one touch point, but it's often multiple ones, right? So it might be that the first touch point is with your phone, maybe also the second or the third, but then at some point you kind of want to sit down, for example, to, I don't know, make a donation, then you want to sit down, consume information at a different level, and then for that you are in front of your desktop, for example. So I think that it's also very important that the kind of experience you have on mobile is translated into the desktop experience and vice versa. What I'm curious, you mentioned before how important it is for you to generate trust, right, with your websites. Is there anything that you have seen works very well when it comes to creating trust?
Yeah, I think actually a lot of charities do this. So guest and volunteer stories. That's the big thing. Is it's real life stories and impact. I think that's a big thing that helps with trust. As a charity, you have to be very open about what you're doing and share your stats. You know that's what your funders want to hear. That's what they want to see. So that's one thing. I think it's nearly 3 years now since we updated our website, but a core of that was we need a space that people can see the impact that we're making. So that's actually a probably better word than the stats. Actually, it's very much about impact. Well, what difference are
Mhm.
you making, and how can you show that? And that's how people will trust you. So if you look at our website, you'll notice that we have stats and impact kind of all over the place. We have a whole page that is full of guest and volunteer stories, because ultimately that's who people trust the most. You know, the people that are using our service, if they're saying it's amazing, then you're going to believe it's amazing, because it is amazing. That's not going to vouch for it. But
Right.
so I think that's the key thing. And also the other thing that I've really worked on over the past 4 years is making sure that the imagery we use really shows what happens at a meal. And again, it's that, you know, they're real people. We don't use kind of models or actors, even though it's quite difficult. We've got vulnerable, not everybody wants to be, you know, photographed. But I think that's really what helped brings our website to life as well, because it's real images. We put lots of images on there. We have videos, and I think that all helps kind of build the trust.
Got it. Yeah. And do you think that when it comes to a transformation story, right, what you just mentioned before, does it work better to showcase what you do for your target group, or so the beneficiaries, or more volunteers?
I think more it's the beneficiaries for sure. Everybody we work with, that's who they want to hear from. But I also think there's a really important space to have the volunteers. So, you know, if you're a volunteer and you think, oh, I don't really know, or do I really want to
Okay.
sign up? Hearing from another volunteer will help somebody just kind of cross that line of signing up to be a volunteer. So I think the volunteers also benefit from hearing from the guests as well, because I think that's so. I would always put guests, our guests and our beneficiaries are definitely at the top, but our volunteers are definitely a very close second.
Okay. Okay. So as a non-profit, it's really important to show both. So not only how you change the life of your beneficiaries, which actually I guess most non-profit do, but also how you change the life of people that decide to support your cause.
Yeah, I mean, I think every charity is slightly different, but I think particularly with what we do at FoodCycle, you know, our volunteers get a huge amount of benefit from volunteering at our meals, and that's the nature of our setup. I mean, most volunteers will get a benefit from what they're doing, otherwise they wouldn't do it. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I think sharing volunteer stories is really really important as well.
Okay, well, that's. I think it's a very good learning because indeed I see a lot the first, but a lot of companies don't do the other part, which is also showing how you change the life of people that volunteer for your organization, which is equally important because, as you said, they also have their own transformation story.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah, interesting. Well, one of the things that I also hear sometimes from charities, right, is that they are a bit reluctant to kind of invest into, say, for example, a new website or a better branding. And the reason for that is because, well, because we're charities. So we don't have a lot of money. We don't want to spend a lot of money. When do you think it's actually a good time for you as a charity to kind of invest into better website or better communication?
yeah. I think it's really hard. This comes up quite a lot, and actually in the UK. Just a couple of weeks ago, the RSPCA did a big rebrand, and immediately they got pulled apart for this is how they shouldn't be spending their money. But kind of as we touched on earlier, we're still an organisation. We still have to operate. We still have
Yeah.
to, you know, we have to do all the things that commercial companies do. And I think, you know, everybody expects people to do it for free or people to donate their time for free. Now that would be absolutely wonderful and lovely, but that's not the reality of it. So I think, you know, when it comes to these projects, we're always cautious. We'll always try and work, you know, with the smallest budgets that we can. I mean, I really don't have a very big marketing budget at all, and we make sure that, you know, we do as much as we can kind of in house, but there are times where we can't do it, because actually it's kind of counterproductive sometimes. So sometimes I think it's just about planning and knowing. So we're just about to go through a bit of a brand health check kind of and potential refresh. But what we're really doing with that is we're doing it step by step. So we're not saying, oh, we're going to completely update our brand, we're going to do this. Actually, what we're going to do is we're going to talk to people and understand, do we need to? What level do we need to do it? And then once we've done that bit, then we'll look at the next stage. So I think for us, we've grown a lot, we're continuing to grow, and I don't think it always comes across in our language exactly what we do, but actually our branding looks quite fun and happy. So it's kind of picking what's actually really important. And I think, a website is really important to invest in and make sure it is working. For us, that's how people find out about us. So that's the second biggest to kind of word of mouth. So we have to have a website that volunteers can sign up to. Otherwise, we can't run our project, and we have to pay for those things. So, so I think, charities are, especially smaller charities, we're really cautious about how much we kind of spend on that. We all generally love the charities that we work for, and we want as much of funding or whatever to go to the actual operations, but having a website means that they can run. So it all kind of fits in. And I think some people don't realize kind of the complexity and how much work it actually is involved in running a charity, and that unfortunately people don't give everything away for free. So.
Got it. Yeah, it's quite relatable, right? What you're saying is that on one side you don't want to spend because your budget is limited, but also you don't realize that if you make that investment, you definitely have more donors, more beneficiaries. So yeah, I think the learning from your experience is really that, well, you shouldn't splurge, you shouldn't be too hasty on how you're spending your money. So kind of a phased approach, step by step, where at every step you decide to, if it makes sense to continue and move ahead, it's probably what makes most sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Is there anything that you use as a tool to kind of make an assessment on how much a certain investment or a certain campaign can give to you as a return? So, for example, if you decide to spend on something, do you kind of have an assumption also on what could be the return in terms of donations that you can receive?
I think that's a really difficult question to answer, actually. I think for us, we don't put a huge amount of spend, say, for instance, behind social media advertising for donations. We're not quite big enough. The awareness isn't enough around us for people to know. So for us to get a good return on a donation campaign, say on Facebook or Instagram ads, we would have to spend an awful lot of money. And for us, we're just not in that kind of place. However, we test a lot of things. So we've tested and trialed Facebook ads for both our volunteers and for our guests. And actually we find that works really, really well. And I think it's our cost per volunteer or active volunteer it can be around £2, which is actually a really low spend. I mean, they might not come on. That's a volunteer sign up, not necessarily somebody who goes on. But for us, that feels like a reasonable amount. And again, I touched on it earlier. It's testing. We have really small budgets, so we're just testing with small amounts. And then if something works, we'll run it more. So again, it's just we're probably maybe a bit overcautious. I'm a bit overcautious. That's just my nature sometimes. But yeah, I just think it's always, marketing is always trial and error. And then just when something works, they change something and it doesn't work. So I just think it's a constant battle of test it. If it works, we'll run it more. If it doesn't, we'll kind of put a pause on it. So I just feel that's it's not a great answer, I don't think. I feel like that's the reality of it.
No, well, I think it's great. And also, I don't think it's too cautious. It makes a lot of sense what you just said, right?
Yeah.
For example, about the auditing that you mentioned, it should be like this kind of projects make more sense when they're seen in steps. And that not that you have necessarily already decided that you want to change something, but it can be, for example, that your users will maybe like what they have and open your eyes on something else that maybe you haven't considered before. For example, well, another example that I had is that I started a project with a company. They wanted to rebrand and changing their colors, right? And out of their colors, there was one that they really want to get rid of, which personally I found quite nice. And I asked them like, is it that you want to change it because it doesn't work or just because it's old? And after a while you just have enough of something, and they were like, yeah, probably the latter. But actually, yeah, it really worked.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
think
it's
that's
a
really
very small example.
Yeah, I think it's so important to go out and ask your audiences. I mean, to be honest, I think that when you ask them, there's never a definitive answer.
Yeah.
We have the same. We inherited. We've got a mascot called Pip, who is on our logo, and the divide between that is almost like Marmite. Some people love it, some people hate it, but I think exactly what you touched on. Do they hate it because it's been around, or and they just want something fresh? Yeah, it's just so you can't ever really get that straight answer, can you? So it's always
No.
difficult. There's always going to be someone who doesn't like it. That's the reality of it.
Yeah. Well, Carly, it has been a very great conversation so far. There's one last thing that I want to ask you. Like, is there anything else that you would like to share in terms of like how to build a great website for an NGO? Something that we haven't touched today.
I don't think that there's anything that we haven't touched on. I think it's about, we've both mentioned it, talking to your audience. One of the things that we are quite cautious about at the moment as well as accessibility. So we changed the colours on our website. It used to be very green. Green isn't a great colour for people who might have sight issues. I think we've still got a lot more work to do on that. But yeah, I think we've probably covered everything.
Okay. Yeah. Well, accessibility is a great theme, by the way. Is there anything? Yeah, you mentioned, for example, colors, green. What I noticed is that basically no website still nowadays allows you to change things like font, for example, or the size of fonts, right? What kind of steps are you guys taking towards a better accessibility?
Yeah, so first off, we kind of changed colours. Also, our background isn't white, which you'll notice it's a slight off-white. That helps. And it's not actually, we're doing this not just on our website, we're doing it we have some printed materials as well, very minimal. Also, I mean, you can get plugins. For us, we didn't feel that that was something that we needed at the moment. And again, it's just a constant conversation with our end users. So I think the size that we are now, we everything seems to be working. We're asking people constantly, it seems to be okay, but we are very, very cautious kind of about that and making sure we've kind of got larger fonts as standard. So yes, the user can't change it, but we always make sure it's a lot bolder. And yet it's just constantly listening and learning. And we touch things change all the time. Just when you think you've nailed it you haven't. So yeah, it's just keeping an eye out on what's out there and just adjusting as and when we need to.
Okay, well, that's great. Carly, I want to thank you a lot for your time today. How can listeners find you or know more about what you guys do?
Yeah, so just head to our website, which is obviously amazing. Website is foodcycle.org.uk, and on there, yeah, you'll find everything about volunteering, what we do, and the impact that we make. You can listen to some great guest stories.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.